We're here for a special one, and it's the 1000. Hello, Nikki. How are you?
Hi, Tammy. Good, thank you. I hope you too as well. And hello, everyone.
Hi. So we're celebrating. We have a weekend, a special one in Le Mans, 1000. But what actually are we celebrating? Because it's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, it can be confusing because basically it was just 3 years ago at the Styrian GP when we celebrated the 900th Premier Class race, and now it's 1000. So you can say that what it's about. So it's a 1000 GP weekend basically, which if you do a not quick calculation, clearly you can understand that it means that not every GP weekend had a Premier Class race. So the history is long, so sometimes it happened they only had the smaller categories, let's say, and not the Premier Class. But this is the 1000th GP weekend. Crazy.
Yes, it is crazy. It's a big number. We, of course, started somebody did in 1949. It started in the Isle of Man, where they used to race quite a lot, even before the war. And after the war, we're talking about, of course, the Second World War. And in 1948, they had a big meeting of what used to be the FIM. It had a different name then. It was called FICM. And they decided, okay, let's have a world championship. And they went for the Isle of Man. And it was over 62 kilometers, the circuit. It took quite a long time. It took more than 3 hours, the race. And it was in days because it was so long. And some of the riders, they competed in 2 championships. So they did one race one day and then the second one the next day. So officially, our winner for the first round is Freddie Frith, but for the top class, it was actually Hero Daniel. So, and both of them were at about their 40s. Actually, the average speed, the difference is not that big. It's about 6 kilometers per hour between the 350 and the 500. And it was quite hectic races. It was very long. Graham, who ended up as the champion, he lost the race a few meters, as they say, the story says, a short while before the end. And then he pushed his bike towards the finish line and he ended up 10th and taking 1 point into his tally for the championship that he won later that year. So it was completely different. The difference between the riders, the gap was over 10 seconds at the finish line. These days, 10 seconds, we have almost all agreed. But when you think about it, it's 3 hours race. So, it's a little bit different. The average speed was, the quick speed, fast speed was a lot lower. Average speed, of course, again, it's a lot lower. It's was 139. And these days we have 161. So the difference is quite big. But it was fascinating to see how it went that time. Of course, a lot of different manufacturers, and but the stats, we have a lot of interesting stats coming up to this week. As a journalist, we go over a lot of things before we start the weekend. We need to know a lot of numbers, and you piled up some of the less. The numbers that we see and hear less often. So give us some of the quirks of the numbers that you found out.
Yeah, I need to cut myself as much as possible because frankly speaking, I'm in love with numbers. That's every time it was the case for me with school, statistics, stuff like that. So I remember when I started to do this job, like MotoGP journalist, I was every time, and maybe I can show it just quickly. A lot of people, I guess, know this Red Book, which is a huge help for us. So clearly I went through, and you just mentioned the TT. And while I was checking, just for example, for me at least, it was a really interesting number that in 1969, still we are talking about the TT race, in the 500 GP class, so in the Premier class, they were 97 participants. 97. Imagine it nowadays. Clearly, we have now the maximum limits because of the track homologization. Normally, it's on 30, 36, depends on the track. 97. And which was more insane, only 31 finished that race. I was surprised, frankly speaking. So these numbers I really like. One thing that maybe it's interesting, we know the youngest and the oldest winners, but yet if you just think that the oldest champion, for example, in the 125 GP category, Nello Pagani was 37 years old and a couple of days, like 241 days old. These things clearly nowadays are just impossible because, for example, we have the maximum age limit. It's 28. Unless you are a newcomer, then it's 25 or with a wild card, so it's even less. So for me, these numbers are so fascinating because this also shows the difference of the sport nowadays and when they began. But I add you the word now, so you can also mention a couple of things, and maybe I have some other hopefully interesting stuff to mention.
Well, it just jumped on me because we're recording this on the 9th of May. And actually today in 1982, we had the one and only female starting the races in the top class. And her name was Gina Bovard. And she started the race in Nogaro because there were a lot of riders who didn't want to participate because of safety concerns. So she jumped in. Unfortunately, she retired. She didn't finish the race, but at least she gave it a go. And she's the only female in the top class. We had a few more, but you know a little bit about these numbers.
Yeah, I cannot tell you the exact number of female riders who ever participated, though even maybe with a white card. But I would say that during the whole history of road racing motorsport or the World Championship, we wouldn't have more than 15 female riders. If I want to be really, really optimistic, maybe I can say 20, but really not more. If we count all the female riders with at least one try. So, but it's really not a huge number. But I'm happy that nowadays we have still Ana Carrasco, we have Maria Herrera in Moto.it at least, and it's a big change, I think, that we have a lot of female telemetrists, mechanic, or not a lot, but much more than in the past. So we have also steps forward from this aspect.
Any more numbers that you want to throw in?
Any more numbers? Well, I think there is a huge competition between Spain and Italy, clearly the two most successful nations in this sport. Italy, if we consider all the categories, so not just 125 backslash Moto3, 250 Moto2, and the Premier class, but if we add all the others like 50, 80, and 350. So altogether, Italy is leading with 872 was the number at the end of last season, 872 victories for Italy, all the categories. But then we had a couple of more this year with Pecco Bagnaia, with Bezzecchi, and I think that's all right. So I'm not that updated.
Arbolino.
And Arbolino, yes. So I didn't update the complete number, but one maybe interesting thing that in a 125 now Moto3 category this year, just with Ivan Ortola's victory, Spain could take the lead, at least in the smallest category now. So now Spain is more successful than Italy there, but the competition is still on.
Yeah, the competition is on and it's tight, and we know it can flip very quickly with, it comes and goes in waves. Another very important number is 817, which is Honda number of wins in the championships, all of them since we started. And an interesting number in there is that Kalex have 165 and Suzuki is at 162, which is not that bad, but it's there. So, and the gap is pretty big. Yamaha has 520. So it's a pretty big gap between the different manufacturers. MV Agusta, of course, it's 275. And it's actually nice to see after a weekend that we had with Superbike and the success of MV Agusta at Superbike. So that's a nice mention to throw in there. Anything else? Oh, we carry on.
Taking care of, well, clearly we have the obvious statistics, as you mentioned, that the youngest winner, or the oldest winner. For the youngest, maybe still a lot of people had in mind Scott Redding, because I think that was something, no, that you still want to say Scott Redding from 2008, we want to say this, but no, because 10 years later, so in 2018 at Valencia, Ken Eunchu took that record at the age of 15 years and 115 days. Clearly, again, a record that will stay maybe forever if they don't change the regulation again.
The regulations are changing now for 18 minimum, so it's going to be very hard to change that. And just a side note, it was possible for him to do it because it was a wild card, because it was champion, and then that's why he was allowed to join in. But there are other big stats in the World Championship, and it's actually more related to how many rounds people were present and how important they are and what they do for the championship. And you prepared a little bit of a jam for us with some of the biggest names and their stories and what they mean for the World Championship.
Yeah, it's also a bit of statistics, because when we understood at the end of last year that Hervé Poncharal stepped down, and clearly he still remains the owner of the Troa team, but not as a team manager anymore. And we could understand that since 1986 he didn't miss a race. So I was like, wow, that's a huge number. That's a huge number. And then I was wondering that maybe there is someone else who attended or has a longer attendance statistics, but no, because I asked him, and he and his wife, because she's also there every time, they missed a couple of races, and I'm talking about Mike Trimby.
Can you first explain who is?
Exactly, and Irena Trimby. So doesn't know, Mike Trimby was who founded IRTA. IRTA is the association for the teams involved and racing in the World Championship, and he started to represent the riders, and he did a huge job for safety. So when we talk about the MotoGP nowadays and how it changed with the TV rights, with the commercial thing, with safety, most of the time we mention Dorna, because their arrival was already a huge push in 92. But I think that the core and the roots of these changes that we can see is coming from Mike Trimby, who started to represent the riders in 92. I think that was really 82, sorry. 82.
Yeah, he actually started the Grand Prix Riders Association in 1982, and since then he started to represent the riders. Then he changed it into IRTA in 86, and it's interesting that it's actually in 1982 because it was, I just mentioned, the races that were a little bit more problematic. Again, in the beginning of the 80s, we were going through still a long period that was safety was a big issue. So he started that, and from there it evolved. And what else can you tell us about Mike Trimby? Because the sport owe him a lot, actually.
The sport owe him a lot. So 82 he started, and he founded IRTA at 86. So that was another step, and he didn't have an easy job at all. Because first FIM and all the organizers basically wanted to ignore him, to be honest. But the riders that time, they pushed because they understood that they needed better circumstances, better safety, better salary, better prize money, basically, but not just for the top riders, but also for the riders the back, let's say, or with less results. And he had kind of obstacles, I would say, that he had to go through. And then he had another huge fight with none else than Bernie Ecclestone, who that time was started to get responsible for the TV rights, because, as I mentioned, Mike Trimby not just realize that safety is something where they need to improve. But the TV rights that time belonged to the tracks and the given organizers of every GP. So it wasn't in one hand. And he understood that they needed to do something with the TV rights, but then clearly it was Carmelo Espeleta with his small group that time. Now it's a big group, Dorna, and they just really switched it to the next level.
Yeah, and the quality and everything jumped immediately at the moment that Dorna took control of everything. And since then, we saw so much evolution. Some people don't understand that. They don't know that when they watch, for example, the Olympics, and you see the jumpers in the sand, and you see the sand floats, and all the running and all the athletics and everything there, it's thanks to developments that are actually done by and at the MotoGP tracks over the years. So there's so many things. Maybe one day we need to do a whole chapter of all the good things that came out of MotoGP and the development that goes on there to other fields. But this is just one thing thanks to the investment in how we see the races. And you just mentioned there, because another big personality that we cannot ignore in the coming up to the celebration of the 1000 is the Espeleta.
Carmelo Espeleta, yeah. Well, as I said that, Dorna's arrival, it really started to transform the championship to something professional, really. So, but again, I think that the job that Mike Trimby started, they could basically just put to the next step and then maybe accelerate a little bit. And clearly they had financial background for that to continue what Mike Trimby started, because if I know correctly, it was Mike Trimby's era when they put the first onboard camera. So it's insane. We are talking about the beginning of the 80s or middle of the 80s.
It was Randy Momola who had it, and it weighed over a kilo, the onboard camera. And yeah, it was a big step. It was the first on camera on something moving. Yeah, it was, we have a lot of people who worked hard. I think a lot of it is a collaboration. And of course, it's contributing one on top of the other, because what Trimby started, somebody had to continue and push from the other side and not only from the inside. And he actually was honored this year by the Racing Association, the British Racing Association, which is a huge prize. Actually, it's a very big honor. So, of course, apart from all the big personalities that we have in the MotoGP paddock and the big bosses, we also have the people who ruled the track for quite a long time. And each one of us had to think who her biggest rider in MotoGP was. And I picked the rider that I think a lot of people would choose, and I went for Valentino Rossi. I went for the doctor, the rider who could save every possibility, every opportunity, seize and take, the rider who conquered so many records. And frankly, I truly believe he changed the sport in so many aspects. I think his charisma is second to none. He's definitely the GOAT. And I think he took with him so many people and brought in so much fun. And he was, from what I see, the rider who was during the change, during the shift, even though it took him very long time to grasp and take it with him. In the beginning, he refused to have social media. He refused even to have an internet site, a website. There was no website for Valentino Rossi until, I think, 2010. So it was quite a change for him as well, from being a rider into a celebrity, even though he was a celebrity more or less the moment he arrived to the world class. So that's my rider. Who is yours?
Well, as I told you, I'm in love with the numbers, so that's why my pick is none else than Giacomo Agostini, 15 times world champion. So I stick with the numbers, but I completely agree that Valentino Rossi, and clearly is something that we cannot debate it, Valentino Rossi changed the sport. Valentino Rossi attracted a lot of people who before that didn't know what MotoGP was about, whether it was existing or
And they
not.
still don't know what MotoGP is, but they do know the name Valentino Rossi, which is a big thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the numbers 122, opposite Valentino is 115 wins in, but even though he has more wins in the MotoGP class,
Yes.
but we need to remember there were more races each season, so it's a little bit also hard to judge and hard to compare because situations completely different since the 70s to the 2000s.
Exactly. And I know that we already skipped the statistics stuff, but we had a short conversation before we started to record. And you mentioned something really interesting, how quickly the numbers accelerated, because clearly when the whole World Championship started, we had 6 races maybe per season.
Yeah.
Now we are talking about 21. Okay, now it's 20 because Kazakhstan has been cancelled. So it's really sometimes it's difficult to compare what happened 20 or maybe 40 or whatever years ago and what's going on nowadays. And it was, sorry, just one more for me interesting thing in the statistics, that they recalculated a couple of the numbers, the points scored during a racing career. And one was really interesting for me, that Giacomo Agostini, for example, scored 1,072 points during his career, which, if we count with the system that we have nowadays, it would have been 2,157. So it's, I just wanted to mention it, that really when we are comparing the things and the statistics, we have these differences. So
Yeah,
for me,
it
it's
changed in 74. Until then, it was 10 points for the winner, and since then, it's complete. It's a different different method. When we talk about the biggest miss, because we were thinking also about that, I actually wanted to go to something a little bit grim, because this is a sport, a dangerous sport, and we know everybody we talked also about before is doing everything in the powers to make it safer. We've seen in the last since 49, we've seen 83 riders die during the races in all the categories. We're mentioning 350, 250, 500, 125, Moto3, Moto2, and MotoGP. And a lot of them were big talents and big riders that expected to be big riders, but 3 names jumped to me when I was thinking about it. Of course, we're talking about Simoncelli and Kato. Both of them only won 2 races. They had 2 podiums in the MotoGP class, but both of them, there was a similarity in that we knew that something is coming. We knew that it's clicking, it's coming, and the win is going to come. And they had so much potential. Both of them arrived as world champions from the 250 class, and both of them had a lot of potential. Both of them had a lot of charisma in their own way. It's a different, the Japanese have different charisma than the Italians, but both of them had a personality, a very likable personality. They had a lot of fan base already, even though they just started their career in the top class. So it truly feels like a miss. And I also wanted to just throw the name of Jarno Saarinen, the Finnish rider who was also a champion in the 250. And he already had wins in the MotoGP class. He won everything he started during that season in 73, but it ended there during a crash in Monza, a very unfortunate crash that was due to safety. And with all 3 riders that we lost, the championship took that loss, and at least we saw some very big improvements from these riders that we lost. But still, when I look at the list of the riders that did not get there, these three, I feel we lost quite a lot, also from the sports side, on top of the personal loss, which is huge.
Exactly. When we discussed the topics of this episode, and you mentioned that the biggest misses, I had two thoughts in my mind, like the silver guys, which I'm going to mention now, and clearly the riders that you just mentioned. And Kato was, yes, he was Japanese, but don't forget that he was living in Italy. Again, a Gresini boy, just like Marco Simoncelli. So he was half Italian, I think. So maybe that was an extra again in his charisma. And yeah, when we talk about, oh, what if, even if we know there is no what if in life, I think also Marco Simoncelli is definitely someone who would have been really, really nice to see what he could have achieved in the Premier class. But as I mentioned, when we're talking about big misses, I was also wondering about the, I would say, silver guys. So riders that won a lot, riders that had the possibility, but maybe they had not so much luck because every time there was a bigger name around. Randy Mamola is definitely one of my pick. Dani Pedrosa, we just talked about him in the last episode. And also Andrea Dovizioso, and clearly I'm talking about not being world champion in the Premier class, because we know that they achieved a lot, but they had the talent. But sometimes in life you also need some luck, and sometimes competing at the same time with one of the biggest name in the sport, so you are just not lucky, I would say.
Yeah, and in some of their cases, it's not only one big name. There were quite a few big names next to them, and that became really, really difficult. And now, your biggest promise. Who do you actually look at and say, okay, to 1001 and forward, who do you see as your biggest promise?
I think we agree that the biggest promise now is Pedro Acosta. Clearly, let's wait and see how his season evolves, and then what the future brings to him. We also discussed that looks like KTM could convince him. So if he steps up already next year to MotoGP, then it should be with the KTM group, I would say, whether it's Gasgas, maybe whether it's Husqvarna.
That's only if they manage to convince Carmelo to let them
Exactly.
bring one as Husqvarna.
Exactly. But Pedro Acosta, he has the talent. Yes, his first season in Moto2 wasn't that easy. Maybe a lot of people expected, but I think this can be good. It can be a good learning curve for him, what he had last year in Moto2, and it can help in MotoGP when he moves up.
Yeah, it can help him stay a little bit more, maybe more humble, understand a little bit how to listen and to learn, because that was his biggest obstacle, that he wasn't listening enough to the people who are there to help him, and they want him to win, but he was a little bit too agitated to really sit down and listen, and he regretted that later, and he admitted to that mistake. And he also has this swag now, this attitude. I spoke to him in the beginning of the season during the test in Portimao, and he has this attitude. His English is flowing now because it's super nice to hear him. And he also has been now a little bit of a politician, because I cannot stop laughing how in all the official data from IO, he's talking about winning the race, and all the interviews he says he's counting the points because he wants the championship. So he knows how to play the game, and I can't wait to see him grow.
Yes, I think he also has the charisma, which is really important.
We're lacking that now.
Yes, a little bit. I think yes, and also even if he's still really, really young, for me, it was really nice to see how he backed up his really good friend, Remy Gardner, last year when Remy was in difficulties and losing his job basically in MotoGP. And so these small, not that small signs for me shows that he has the charisma. So one more thing, that if he will have the luck to find someone really strong as well in MotoGP who can he can compete with closely, that can also help for him to become a hero, and also maybe for MotoGP to do that step again, which happened with Valentino.
Because we at this moment we have so many talented riders, and it's the best class we ever had, or almost the best class we ever had, and it's difficult a little bit to find your hero or the bad guy, or so it spreads too much. The racing itself is really, really good, but for the outside world, not for the hardcore, it's a little bit more difficult to digest when there's not one big name that screams out. Because even if in the promotion that we see that coming out for this weekend, it ends at the Marquez era, because that's how it jumps. So we still don't have the current era in the summarize of the 1000 GPs. Let's move a little bit more personal. So I wanted to know, Niki, if you could tell us one from the 1000 races. Of course, you couldn't attend all 1000. I don't know if you know how many you did.
Honestly, I should know. I didn't check before we recorded, but I have a chart. Frankly speaking, I have an Excel sheet where I count. So yeah.
Please, I'll ask you next time.
Okay, I will do my homework. I will do my homework.
If you could tell us one, share with me one personal encounter.
The first moment which comes into my mind, I don't know, I mean, I know why, but it's 2009 Catalonia GP, and that famous last corner battle between Jorge Lorenzo and Valentino Rossi. Yes, I know why, because that race was really exciting and that last final corner battle was really exciting. But I was lucky to see a couple of other races like this. But that time I have the memory standing in the media center, because that time I was not allowed to be in the pit lane during the race. So I was in the media center, and I remember just running to the window, and I wanted to see with my eyes, but then I also had to check the monitor. So it was just the adrenaline rush that I had there. It's really something that I think I will never forget.
That's nice.
What
That's
about
lovely.
What about you?
Well, if we're talking about the first thing I remember, well, I actually want to mention the first race I attended. It was in 2003. It was Assen. It was raining like hell. I don't remember the sky ever looking so black. And I came in as a Gibernau fan. I was a big Gibernau fan because I found it, I could relate to him because of what happened with Kato and how he responded after Kato passed. And because I was dealing with my own loss. Actually, the day this is airing on the 11th is going to be the 22nd anniversary since I lost my brother. So for me, it was to go there was a celebration with my brother, with my younger brother who's alive, my older brother, best friend. And so for me, it was a celebration of my brother that I have lost. And to see Gibernau winning that race in the rain. And I think I was the only Chipper Now fan there because everybody was Valentino. And we were under these plastic sheets because this is how it goes in us. And when it's raining, they pull down these plastic sheets and everybody hides underneath them. And because it was the Steckenville corner. And I literally shouted, Sette, will you marry me when you passed us?
Did he hear you?
No, of course he didn't. I was in Steckenville. It's so far away. But I did tell him a few years ago.
And what did he
And
say?
he said I should have known. I would have said yes. But just so you know, a side note, he was with Esther then. I knew it. It was just a fun thing we just did because it was such a crazy day. I just remember under a raining suit, my underwear were wet. Under a full raining suit because it was so wet. It was crazy. So that was my first race. But do you remember when you met somebody, a rider, somebody that you met that made
Yeah, well, it's funny because I don't remember, but I have a photo and I will put it here and I will send it to you as well. By the way, now I can, so my first race was in 2002, where I attended, but just as a guest. So it was still not like a journalist that came a bit later. And one thing I remember, and what I also try to remember or try to not forget, the feeling and the enthusiasm the first time I could step into the paddock, and how I was like, Alice in Wonderland, and this is the feeling that I try to feel every time, also nowadays, and the feeling I try to, or I would like to share with my viewers, readers, whatever I do. But that was not the first time I met someone from the world of the Road Racing World Championship, but I think that time I had no idea who the gentleman was who just handed me a trophy, I guess, in Budapest back in 1986. Now I will say the number correctly. So when I was 4 years old, and the gentleman who handed me a trophy was none else than Giacomo Agostini. And clearly I had no clue. Okay, I had no clue. I was 4 years old. So, and then I found the picture, or my mom gave me the picture when I started to go to more often to the MotoGP as a journalist. So 1 year, it was like 10 years ago, more or less. I showed the picture to Giacomo. I showed the picture to one of the Italian journalists, Paolo Scalera. And basically Scalera just took a really similar picture, almost the same picture. We tried to reconstruct, that picture from a lot of years ago. So he was my first met from the big guys and from the heroes of this sport. But that time, as I said, he was just a nice man who gave me a trophy. And what about you? It was Seta maybe, or?
No, it was I actually don't remember who it was in the paddock, because I used to do some work for before I was a journalist. I used to do some work for then called Riders for Health. So I would walk around. I don't remember who it was, but one thing I do remember that it clicked, that people know who I am, is when I actually there's something with Valentino that he goes every night after during the week, the races. He used to go and watch movies in his trailer, and I knew that. And one of his biggest fan is a director called Ali Folman, who did the movie called Vals with Bashir, which is a animation. And it's a beautiful work. It got the Golden Globe, was nominated for an Oscar. And I had no doubt that Valentino would love this. And Ari is a huge, huge Valentino fan. So I told him, bring me a CD. This is the days we were talking about. Bring me a CD. So he gave me a CD with the subtitles in Italian, because, that's how it worked. And I gave it to Valentino in 2010. And I gave it during a debrief. I just handed him, somebody gave it to you, and I gave it to him with a note because Valentino is still, it's terrifying still to talk to him even today. So, when you grow up on somebody, you grow up on him. And so it's still terrifying. I'll probably shake if I need to talk to Wayne Rainey and stuff like that. So I gave it to him and I just left, finished and everything. And the next day I was walking pit lane and he came from somewhere, I don't know from where, and he was alone. And then he turns around and he waves at me and I was like, and like in rom-com, I turn around and and I was like, it's to me. You're actually waving to me. And then I was, okay. So I said, okay, yeah, relax. You're here. You're fine. He knows who you are. And he's thankful because he saw the movie last night. So, and that was one of the moments that clicked also, when riders remember and know who you are at the beginning, it's something that it takes a moment to realize, because I don't know if there is any journalist in the paddock or photographer who is not really a fan of the sport. And at the moment we enter and we do our thing and we realize this is what we do, when it clicks, it's pretty emotional, I think, for all of us.
I think it's impossible to do it without being a huge fan, and this is what I used to say. This is kind of a drug, to be honest. So once it catches you, it's really, really difficult to walk away. Really difficult.
You talked about the feeling in the paddock. For me, the feeling is when I feel the bikes in my feet. That moment, there's a moment that you feel them in your feet, all the noise, all the bass. That's a very special moment. And I just hope everybody who hasn't been to a race weekend, you have to go. Just find a way, go one time, you'll be addicted. And if you have friends and you want them to become fans, take them with you. At the moment they feel that feeling, it's addicting.
I agree.
So while we finish that, while we wrap this up, I wanted to know what do you wish for? What do you look forward to in the next 1,000 GPs?
Wow. Well,
I don't know if we'll be here for the next 1,000, even though we jump 100 in about 5 years now, 5.5 years. But we'll see the 1,100 in I think 2029 probably.
Wow. Well, for me now it's still a lot of time. I'm not sure where I will be, but what I hope that MotoGP can go through of these difficulties that we are facing now with the popularity. This is unfortunately by fact, and I hope that we will have another Valentino Rossi. Whether it will be Pedro Acosta, can be. Whether it will be someone after him, that's also an option. Because also I like, as a lot of other people, I like to see the heroes. I like to see these huge wins and the numbers and will be the best of ever or not, because for me this is something exciting.
Yeah, I can agree with you, and I will just add to that I a lot of the times we ask the riders also quite often if this is a sport or a show. And this is an ongoing debate. And as much as I like it to be a show, I do want it still to stay a sport. And I hope it will stay more a sport than a show. And that's my hope for it, because it is a damn amazing sport. And these riders, they are athletes in every bone and everything in them. And I just wanted I wanted to stay sport. I wanted to get the popularity, as you mentioned. I completely agree. I think it deserves a lot more than it gets. And you and I both do our best to get it out there in every way we can. and we are not rich for it. We both came into it from passion, from love. To me personally, this sport, it it saved my life. It brought me up when I was down. It still does. And I want more people, as many people as possible, to enjoy it.
You were talking from my head, from my heart, and this is really an important aspect that you just brought up. That I hope that this remains a sport, because this is a sport I love since I can remember. This was more or less the first thing I started to do, though. To be completely honest, I had no idea about it. That time it wasn't called MotoGP. It was the Road Racing World Championship. But frankly speaking, I had no idea about it. I just got a bike from my parents, first an electric one, and I just fall in love with the speed and with the adrenaline and with everything. And then for me, it was also kind of a safe place. And because I was forced to stop racing, it was not a choice. It happened this way. And for me, it was something that helped me to go through in this, and I could stay in this environment, and I can still feel this adrenaline and everything that you just also explained.